My name is Annabelle Thompson. I am 28 years old, and 4 weeks ago I watched my parents steal my inheritance while my grandmother lay dying in hospice. I can say that now with a kind of composure that once felt impossible. The version of me who lived through it was not composed. She moved through those days as if she were underwater, hearing voices muffled and distant, feeling every emotion arrive a second too late, struggling to stay upright while the ground rearranged itself beneath her. But I am not that version anymore. Before I tell you how I took everything back, please like and subscribe if this story resonates with you. What happened to me did not begin with the theft. It began years earlier, inside a family structure that treated love like a transaction and loyalty like a leash. In our house, affection was allocated according to usefulness. My sister Megan, 4 years younger, was treated as an investment, polished, protected, and constantly positioned for advantage. I was treated as background labor. The dependable one. The quiet one. The one whose needs could be postponed indefinitely without consequence. I teach music for a living. Piano, mostly. Children between the ages of 6 and 13, still soft enough to believe in effort and wonder. My parents never said they were ashamed of my career outright. They didn't need to. Disdain has its own vocabulary, small pauses, amused sighs, the way my father's eyes would drift away whenever I spoke about my students. A music teacher, he'd say, as if the words were a temporary condition. That's sweet. Sweet, small, decorative. Megan, on the other hand, was ambition wearing perfume. She had learned early how to perform desirability as a skill. She smiled with calculation. She laughed at the right moments. She curated her future like a brand. And recently, she had been dating Daniel Harrison. 8 months. That was all. But in my parents' minds, it was already a merger. Daniel's father, James Harrison, was my father's most important business partner, wealthy, particular. The type of family that did not simply observe appearances, they worshipped them. And Megan, eager to ascend, had become the center of a new household religion, make Megan impressive enough to secure the Harrisons. At the expense of anything. At the expense of anyone. Including me. Including my grandmother. Grandma Eleanor Whitmore was my mother's mother, 76 years old, sharp as a blade even as her heart betrayed her. She had been a concert pianist in her youth. Not the kind who played casually at dinner parties, but the kind who traveled, performed, and carried a quiet authority that made people sit straighter. She was the only person in my family who looked at me as if I were not a burden. She had taught me my first scales on her antique Steinway, the one from 1892 with ivory keys worn smooth from decades of devotion. That piano was not just an object. It was history. It was identity. It was the only inheritance that ever felt like it belonged to me in a world that constantly reminded me I was replaceable. And Grandma promised it to me. Not in vague sentimental terms. Not as a whispered hope. She said it plainly, firmly, in front of everyone. "It's yours, Annabelle," she told me one evening in hospice, her eyes fierce despite the oxygen tube. "I already told Richard and Diane. Last month. In front of everyone. That piano belongs to you." I believed her. I had no reason not to. I didn't yet understand how effortlessly my parents could rewrite reality when it benefited them. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon, right after my last piano lesson of the day. I was closing my studio, stacking sheet music, erasing tiny penciled notes from a student's book. My hand smelled faintly of dust and old paper. My phone rang. It was my father. No greeting. No softness. His voice was clipped, managerial. "Eleanor's had another heart attack," he said. "She's stable, but they're moving her to hospice. Family meeting at the hospital in an hour." The words landed with blunt force. Hospice. It felt like a door closing. "I'll be there," I said, already reaching for my coat. At the hospital, my parents and Megan were clustered in a corner of the waiting room like executives preparing for negotiation rather than family-facing loss. My father, Richard Thompson, stood with his arms crossed, his suit immaculate, his expression set in the hard lines of control. My mother, Diane, clutched her designer purse with both hands, as if holding onto something expensive could shield her from grief. Megan sat between them, scrolling through her phone, barely looking up. "Good," my father said when he saw me. "You're here." No hug. No concern for how I was holding up. Just confirmation that the workforce had arrived. "We need to divide responsibilities," he continued, already in motion. "Someone needs to visit Mother daily. Diane and I have the business to run. Megan's in a critical phase with Daniel's family." Critical phase. As if dating were a military campaign. My father turned to me, his gaze assessing, calculating. "So, Annabelle," he said, "you'll handle the visits. Your schedule is flexible. Teachers don't exactly work overtime." The sentence was casual, but its message was familiar. Your time is cheap. Your life is less important. I wanted to say that I taught 37 children every week. That I ran after-school programs. That my work mattered. That my fatigue was real. But I swallowed it the way I always did. "Of course," I said quietly. "I want to be with her anyway." "Perfect," my father replied, already turning away. "Keep us updated if anything changes." As I walked toward Grandma's room, I heard my mother's voice drift down the hallway, meant for Megan's ears alone. "At least she's useful for something." I didn't turn around. Not because it didn't hurt. Because I had learned that reacting only gave them evidence to label me dramatic. Grandma's hospice room smelled like lavender and old books. She insisted on both. "They tried to make everything smell like antiseptic," she told me on my first visit, grimacing. "I refuse. If I'm going to die, I'll die surrounded by things I love." Even in hospice, she was Eleanor. Defiant, precise. Magnanimous in the way she offered kindness without ever begging for it. She looked smaller in that bed than she ever had at her piano bench, but her eyes were still sharp. "Anna," she said when I entered, and hearing my childhood nickname nearly broke me. "Come here." I sat beside her, took her hand. Her grip was weaker than I remembered, but it was still deliberate. We talked every day after school. About music. About her old concert halls. About my students who still struggled to read notes but already understood rhythm in their bones. One evening, she squeezed my hand and said, "I need you to know something." "Anything, Grandma." "The Steinway," she whispered. My heart tightened. "It's yours," she said firmly. "Promise me you'll take care of it." "I promise," I said without hesitation, because I meant it with my whole life. She smiled then, a knowing smile that felt like a door opening into a room I hadn't been allowed to see yet. "There are some things more valuable than money," she said softly, "and some people who need to learn that lesson the hard way." 2 weeks later, everything changed. Grandma asked me to bring her old photographs from the house, pictures from her performing days. She wanted to see them one last time. I still had a key, so after school on a rainy Thursday afternoon, I drove to her home. The sky was heavy and gray, rain tapping steadily against my windshield like an impatient warning. The house was quiet. Too quiet. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside, the air smelling faintly of dust and furniture polish. The familiar hallway felt colder than usual, as if the home itself sensed something missing. I walked past the dining room and into the living room. And I stopped breathing. The Steinway was gone. The corner where it had stood for 30 years was empty except for a rectangular indent in the carpet, a pale outline like a ghost of something sacred that had been ripped away. For a moment I couldn't move. My hands went numb. My throat tightened. I stared at the empty space as if the piano might return if I simply looked hard enough. Then my body caught up, and my fingers trembled as I pulled out my phone. I called my mother. She answered on the third ring, sounding irritated, as if I'd interrupted something important. "Mom," I said, and my voice cracked despite my effort. "Where's Grandma's piano?" A pause. Then her voice, casual, dismissive. "Your father handled it," she said. "Adult matters, Anna. You don't need to worry about it." "Handled it how?" I demanded. "Where is it?" "I said don't worry about it," she snapped. Mom clicked. She hung up. I stood in that empty living room, rain pattering against the windows, thunder rolling in the distance. The world felt suddenly unstable, as if reality had shifted and no one had bothered to tell me. I drove to my parents' house that evening. My father opened the door holding a glass of scotch, looking annoyed at the interruption. Warm light spilled from inside behind him. Laughter. Megan's voice. The piano, I said, not bothering with greeting. What did you do? He didn't flinch. Sold it, he said. Got 95,000 for it. Good price. The word struck like ice water. You sold it? I repeated slowly. Grandma said it was mine. Grandma's dying, Anna, he replied, taking a sip of scotch as if we were discussing a minor inconvenience. She doesn't need a piano. And neither do you. My mouth went dry. Behind him, I heard the bright jingle of keys. Megan appeared in the hallway, grinning, swinging a brand new key fob like a trophy. New keys, she sang softly, eyes glittering. For a new car. I looked at her. Then at my father. You bought her a car, I said, my voice flat. With Grandma's piano, Megan added smugly, leaning into the cruelty like it was a game, Mercedes-Benz. My mother stepped into view behind my father, arms crossed, her expression hardening into something judgmental. Megan needs to make the right impression on the Harrisons, my father said smoothly. Daniel's family is particular about appearances. The Harrisons. Of course. That piano was promised to me, I said quietly, and it wasn't a plea. It was a statement of fact. And what would you do with it? My mother asked, her tone dripping with superiority. You teach children's music classes, Anna. You don't perform. I stared at her. You don't have the space, she continued. Megan needed that money for her future. Her future. The way she said it made my life sound temporary. Megan sauntered forward, swinging the keys again. Don't be jealous, she said, flashing a smile full of teeth. It's not a good look. Maybe if you'd picked a better career, you could afford nice things too. I looked at them, my father with his scotch, my mother with her designer certainty, my sister with her smug triumph. And I felt something inside me detach. A clean severing. Does Grandma know? I asked. Silence. Does she know you sold her piano? I repeated. My mother's face hardened further. She's in hospice, Annabelle. She's on morphine half the time. She doesn't need to know anything that might upset her. You mean you don't want her to know? My mother stepped closer. Her voice lowered into something cold, controlled, and overtly threatening. That if you tell her, she said, and it causes her stress, and something happens, that will be on you. My stomach dropped. Do you want to be responsible for killing your grandmother? She whispered. The accusation hung in the air like poison. For a second, my mind went blank. The old version of me, the obedient version, would have backed down. Would have apologized. Would have let them keep the lie because peace was always more valuable than truth in our family. But something had shifted. Grandma Eleanor's eyes flashed in my memory. Her voice. Truth can wound, but lies always wound deeper. Grandma has a right to know what happened to her property, I said quietly. And I won't lie to her. My father's expression darkened. Annabelle. But I didn't wait. I turned and walked out before my knees could betray me. The cold air outside hit my face like a slap. I sat in my car gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. My heart pounded as if it were trying to outrun the entire night. I drove home with the rain chasing me. And I didn't sleep. My apartment felt smaller than usual, modest, secondhand furniture, walls thin enough to hear my neighbor's television. My parents had always mocked it as proof of my poor life choices. I sat on my couch staring at a framed photo on my bookshelf. Grandma Eleanor at her final concert 20 years ago, fingers poised above those ivory keys, face luminous with purpose. That same piano. The one they sold like it was nothing. My mother's words looped in my head, if you tell her and she dies, that will be on you. For hours I sat with the moral weight of it. Would the truth harm Grandma? Would it break her fragile heart? But then I remembered something else. My parents had never protected Grandma from pain. They had protected themselves from accountability. Keeping silent wouldn't keep Grandma safe. It would keep them safe. And I was done being complicit in my own erasure. By 3 in the morning, I made my decision. Grandma deserved the truth. And my parents deserved whatever that truth would unleash. The next morning, the rain had moved on, but the world still looked bruised. The sky over Boston was pale and overcast, the kind of gray that makes buildings look harsher and people look more hurried. I drove to the hospice center with my hands locked around the steering wheel, my knuckles still aching from the night before. Every red light felt too long. Every pedestrian crossing too slow. My body moved forward, but my mind kept returning to my mother's threat like a bruise you can't stop pressing. If you tell Grandma and she dies, that's on you. It was an accusation dressed as caution. A form of emotional blackmail my mother wielded with disturbing elegance. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The cruelty was in how calmly she could place responsibility for death on the person who refused to lie. When I walked into the hospice wing, the air changed immediately, quiet, filtered, intimate. The lights were softer here. The hallways smelled faintly of antiseptic and lavender, as if the building itself was trying to compromise between medicine and mercy. The nurse at the desk recognized me. "Morning, Anna," she said gently. "She's awake. Good day today." I nodded, unable to speak for a second, because good day felt like such a fragile phrase. As if we were borrowing it from the future. Grandma's door was slightly open. I could already hear the low sound of classical music playing from the small speaker I'd brought her, Debussy, soft and melancholic, like water moving through a dark room. I stepped inside. She was propped up on pillows, her silver hair brushed neatly despite everything. She looked smaller than she had a month ago, her collarbones sharp beneath the thin hospital gown. But her eyes were still Eleanor Whitmore's, alert, assessing. Impossible to deceive. "Anna," she said, and her voice warmed slightly when she spoke my name. "You look like you didn't sleep." I forced a smile and crossed the room, setting my bag down gently. "I slept," I lied, because I didn't know how to begin. Grandma watched me the way pianists watch hands, attentive to tremors, to hesitation, to what isn't being said. "Sit," she said, patting the side of the bed. I sat beside her and took her hand. Her skin was papery and cool, but her grip was deliberate. Still in control. For a minute, I tried to talk about safe things. A student who finally mastered a difficult piece. The weather. A silly story about a child mispronouncing Mozart. Grandma listened politely, but her gaze never softened. She was waiting. Finally, she said quietly, "Tell me what they did." My breath caught. The word they carried years of knowledge. I looked down at our joined hands. The guilt pressed against my ribs, heavy and insistent. "Grandma?" My voice cracked. I swallowed and tried again. "Your piano is gone." Her face didn't change. No shock. No confusion. Just a slow narrowing of her eyes, as if she'd been expecting confirmation. "I see," she said evenly. My throat tightened with sudden anger. They sold it. Now her expression sharpened, not with sadness but with something colder, clarity, perhaps, or disdain. "For how much?" she asked. 95,000, I whispered. Dad said it like it was a good deal. Grandma exhaled slowly through her nose. A controlled breath. Measured restraint. "And where is the money?" I felt my stomach turn. "They used it to buy Megan a Mercedes. For the Harrisons." Still, Grandma didn't cry. She didn't collapse. She simply stared at the wall for a long moment, as if arranging facts in her mind like chess pieces. Then she looked at me again. "What did Diane say?" she asked softly. My pulse quickened. She said. I hesitated, because repeating it felt like spreading poison. But Grandma didn't flinch from poison. She stared straight at it. She said if I told you, I said quietly, and you got upset, and something happened. It would be my fault. Grandma's eyes went dangerously still. For the first time, her hand tightened around mine, not weak now, but firm. A reminder that even in hospice, Eleanor Whitmore was not fragile prey. Listen to me, Anna, she said, her voice suddenly low and commanding. No one gets to weaponize my death against you. Tears burned behind my eyes, hot and humiliating. I didn't want to hurt you, I whispered. I didn't want this to hurt me? Grandma interrupted, her tone sharpening. Sweetheart, they didn't hurt me. They revealed themselves. She let that settle. Then she said something that made my entire body go cold. They think I'm confused. I blinked. What? Grandma's smile was slow and almost amused, except there was no warmth in it. They've been treating me like furniture for years, she said. As if I'm already half gone. They speak over me. They decide things without asking. They use my home like it belongs to them. My heart began to pound again, but this time with a different emotion, recognition. You knew, I whispered. I suspected, she corrected. And I prepared. She reached toward the bedside table and picked up her phone. Even that movement felt symbolic. Eleanor Whitmore did not ask permission to act. Grandma, what are you doing? I asked, suddenly anxious. Making a call, she said. One call. I watched as her thumb moved across the screen, unhurried, precise. The contact name appeared. Harold Jennings. Grandma pressed the call button. It rang once. Twice. Then a man answered, voice calm, familiar, as if he'd been expecting her. Eleanor, he said. How are you feeling today? I've been better, Grandma replied evenly. But I'm still myself, Harold. A pause. Yes, Harold said quietly. I can hear that. I need you to come on Sunday, Grandma continued. To the house. Diane's birthday party. Another pause. A sound like paper shifting on the other end, as if Harold were already retrieving documents without being asked. I understand, he said. Richard and Diane sold the Steinway, Grandma said, tone flat. 95,000. They used it to buy Megan a Mercedes. Harold's voice did not change, but something sharpened beneath it. I'm sorry to hear that. Was there written consent? No, Grandma replied. And they threatened Annabelle to keep her silent. There was a brief silence on the line. A cold one. Thank you for telling me, Harold said finally. I'll be there. I'll bring everything. Grandma's eyes flicked toward me. Good, she said. Because I'm done watching them pretend they're decent people. Harold exhaled softly. Eleanor. Are you sure you want to proceed this way? Grandma's smile returned, slow and dangerous. Yes, she said. They wanted an audience. They can have one. I'll see you Sunday, Harold replied. Grandma ended the call and set the phone back down as if she'd just ordered groceries. I stared at her, my heart racing. What is he bringing? I asked. Grandma turned her head slightly and looked at me with a tenderness that made my throat ache. Documentation, she said. 30 years of it. I swallowed. Grandma, I don't want you to be stressed. She waved a hand lightly. Anna, stress did not keep me alive this long. Stupidity might finally kill me if I allow it. Despite myself, a small laugh escaped me, shaky but real. Then her expression softened. Come closer, she said. I leaned in, and she brushed her fingers gently over my cheek the way she used to when I was little. They think you're weak, she whispered. Because you're kind. Because you don't shout. Because you don't demand. My eyes filled again. That is not weakness, she continued. That is restraint. And restraint is power when you finally decide to use it. I nodded, unable to speak. Grandma's gaze shifted toward the window, where thin light filtered through blinds like pale ribbons. Your mother thinks she owns my house, she said quietly. My breath stopped. What? I whispered. Grandma looked at me again, and there was something almost amused in her eyes. I never transferred the deed, she said calmly. Not 10 years ago. Not ever. My stomach dropped, but in a different way now, like the ground was giving way to reveal a deeper, stronger foundation beneath it. They've lived there rent-free for a decade, Grandma continued, voice even. And they've been very comfortable spending what isn't theirs. I stared at her. They think it's theirs. Grandma nodded. Of course they do. People like your parents assume entitlement is the same as ownership. I felt a slow heat rise in my chest, anger, yes, but also something steadier. Justice. Grandma squeezed my hand again. Sunday, she said simply. You'll see. I left hospice that day with my shoulders straighter than when I arrived. The truth had already wounded me. But telling it had lifted something heavier, the burden of silence. My parents had weaponized my grandmother's dying days to steal from me. Now my grandmother had weaponized their arrogance. And the stage they had chosen, Diane's birthday party, the Harrison family present, business partners watching, would become the place where their entire carefully constructed image would collapse. Not loudly, not violently, just, completely. Sunday arrived like a performance. The kind of day my mother loved, bright winter sunlight without warmth, crisp air that made expensive coats look purposeful, a sky so clean and blue it felt staged. I woke before my alarm, not because I was rested, but because my body refused to pretend this was ordinary. I dressed carefully. Not in morning colors, not in defiance, but in something controlled. A soft cream sweater, tailored black slacks, low heels. The kind of outfit that communicates composure without begging for attention. My grandmother had taught me, long ago, that the most potent revenge is delivered with steady hands. When I pulled into my parents' driveway, the house looked exactly as it always did, large, polished, smugly charming. 2 stories of clean windows and manicured hedges. A porch decorated with tasteful seasonal wreaths. It radiated the comfort of people who believed consequences were for others. Cars lined the street. Luxury sedans. SUVs with tinted windows. A few sleek models that spoke of wealth without needing to shout. I recognized one immediately. A silver Audi that belonged to James Harrison. My stomach tightened. So the Harrisons were here. Good. Inside the house, it smelled like roasted meat, cinnamon, and curated perfection. My mother's voice floated from the kitchen, bright, high, artificially warm. Champagne's in the dining room. Please, make yourselves comfortable. As I stepped into the foyer, I paused instinctively, my eyes moving toward the living room. The corner where the Steinway had once lived was covered by a tall plant now, an enormous fiddle-leaf fig, as if a piece of greenery could disguise absence. The rug beneath it still carried the faint rectangular imprint where the piano's legs had stood. It looked like a scar they'd tried to decorate. My father stood near the fireplace talking to 2 men in tailored suits, his laughter practiced and loud enough to be heard. He looked relaxed, pleased with himself. He had the expression of someone who believed the worst was already avoided. Megan swept into the room wearing a fitted crimson dress, her hair glossy, her makeup flawless. She looked like a woman auditioning for a role she thought she deserved. Behind her, Daniel Harrison entered with his parents. The Harrisons were the kind of family you could identify immediately: controlled posture, measured smiles, a subtle air of evaluation. James Harrison's gaze swept the room in slow appraisal, as if every detail of the home reflected the competence of the man who lived inside it. His wife, Cynthia, wore pearls and an expression of polite distance. Megan's hand rested lightly on Daniel's arm. Possessive, strategic. And then she saw me. Her eyes flicked over my outfit, my posture, the calm in my face. She smiled, but it was not friendly. Anna, she said, tone sugary. You made it. As if attendance were optional at the event happening in the place my family treated like theirs. Of course, I replied evenly. Her smile tightened. Try to be in a good mood today, okay? Mom's been stressed. My mouth stayed neutral, but my mind translated her words automatically. Don't embarrass us. My father spotted me then. His expression shifted quickly, irritation masked as tolerance. Annabelle, he said, approaching with a glass of bourbon in his hand. You're here. Yes, I replied. He leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. Don't start anything today. I looked at him directly. I didn't start anything last week either. His eyes hardened. We're having guests. As am I said softly. He frowned. What does that mean? It means, I said calmly, I'm not the only person who will be listening today. He stared at me for a moment, as if deciding whether to challenge me. Then he dismissed me with a small shake of his head, like I was an unimportant irritation. There she is. Someone announced loudly. Aunt Margaret. She entered like a woman who didn't believe in tiptoeing around truth. My mother's older sister, broad-shouldered, sharp-eyed, dressed in navy with a gold brooch that looked like it had belonged to Grandma once. She hugged me firmly. You look pale, she murmured. You ready? I nodded. Are you? Margaret's smile was grim. I've been ready for 10 years. My mother intercepted her before she could move farther into the room. Margaret, Diane said brightly, the smile on her face almost aggressive. So nice of you to come. Margaret glanced around the living room, her eyes landing on the empty piano corner with immediate disgust. Where's Mom Steinway? She asked loudly. The room quieted slightly. Not completely, but enough. Enough for the question to hang. My mother's smile twitched. Oh, she said quickly, waving her hand as if it were an unimportant detail. We moved some things around. Margaret's gaze sharpened. Moved it where? My father stepped in with a practiced laugh. Margaret, don't start. Today's Diane's birthday. Margaret lifted her chin. I asked a question. My mother's voice tightened. It's being serviced. The lie was smooth. Almost impressive. Margaret didn't smile. Interesting. She turned to me briefly, eyes full of something fierce. Then she walked away before my parents could scold her into silence. For the next hour, the party functioned like a theater production. My mother circulated, laughing too brightly, touching arms, offering drinks. My father talked business, soaking in admiration. Megan stayed close to the Harrisons, positioning herself like a desirable asset. And I stayed calm. Not because I felt calm. Because I had learned that when people want you to look unstable, your composure becomes evidence against them. At exactly 3:15, my father clapped his hands. Everyone, he called, voice loud, cheerful. If you could step outside for a moment. A ripple of excitement moved through the guests. Outside, the winter air hit my cheeks sharply. People gathered on the driveway, coats pulled tight, champagne flutes raised. My father stood beside the garage door, grinning. Megan bounced slightly on her heels. Daniel looked amused. James Harrison looked curious. My mother stood with her hands clasped, smiling with a pride that seemed almost desperate. This, my father announced, is a special surprise for Diane's birthday. He paused dramatically, as if savoring the moment. And also, he added, turning toward the Harrison family, a celebration of the future. Megan's smile widened. My stomach turned, not with jealousy, but with disgust. My father lifted his arm and gestured grandly toward the driveway. A black Mercedes-Benz sat there with a massive red bow stretched across the hood, absurdly theatrical. The guests gasped. Oh my, someone exclaimed. Megan covered her mouth with both hands, eyes sparkling as if she had no idea, though her performance was so practiced it might have been rehearsed in front of a mirror. Happy birthday, Diane, my father said proudly, and congratulations to Megan. We wanted to give her something to match the level of the family she's joining. James Harrison's eyebrows lifted slightly. Cynthia Harrison smiled politely. Megan squealed and rushed forward, hugging my mother. This is unbelievable, she said loudly. You guys are the best. My father laughed, basking in admiration. Then he looked across the driveway and spotted me. His smile thinned. And before anyone asks, he said casually, we made the smart move. Eleanor agreed to sell that old piano. It wasn't being used, and the money went to something meaningful. My heart went very still. He was rewriting Grandma's will while she was alive. With a straight face. Megan turned toward me with an innocent smile that was anything but. See, Anna? She said sweetly. Grandma wanted this. Don't be bitter. A few guests laughed softly, assuming it was harmless sibling teasing. Aunt Margaret's eyes flashed. That's funny, Margaret said loudly, stepping forward. Because Eleanor told me last month that piano belonged to Anna. The driveway quieted. My father's face tightened. Margaret, don't do this. Margaret smiled coldly. Oh, I'm not doing anything. I'm clarifying. James Harrison's gaze shifted between them. My mother's voice sharpened. Let it go. Margaret ignored her. Did Eleanor sign anything? Margaret asked, voice rising slightly so everyone could hear. My father took one step forward. His smile returned, too polished. Eleanor is not in a position to manage assets right now, he said smoothly. We handled it responsibly. End of story. I felt the words end of story like an insult. Because my father believed a story ended when he declared it so. Then the front door opened. A man stepped out onto the porch, tall, gray-haired. Navy suit. Briefcase in hand. Harold Jennings. He paused at the top step and surveyed the driveway calmly, as if he were assessing a courtroom before speaking. My father froze. My mother's smile collapsed instantly into panic. Megan's mouth parted slightly, her eyes narrowing in confusion. Harold descended the steps with measured steps, the sound of his shoes on wood oddly loud in the winter air. Richard Thompson, he called, voice calm and authoritative. Good afternoon. My father's voice came out tight. Harold. Harold nodded once. Eleanor asked me to attend, he said. And since so many witnesses are present, I believe now is an excellent time. The driveway was completely silent. James Harrison's expression sharpened into interest. Cynthia Harrison's polite smile faded. Daniel glanced at Megan, uncertain. And my father? My father looked as though the ground had shifted beneath him. Harold lifted his briefcase slightly. I have documents, he said, that will make the ownership of this house very clear. My mother's breath caught. Megan whispered, barely audible, what documents? Harold's gaze turned toward her. The kind that determine who gets to stay, he said calmly, and who needs to leave. Harold Jennings did not raise his voice. He didn't need to. Authority, real authority, has a different volume. It doesn't shout. It simply arrives and expects the world to adjust. The driveway had become unnaturally still. 30 guests stood with champagne flutes and forced smiles suspended midair, as if someone had pressed pause on the entire party. The red bow on the Mercedes looked ridiculous now, too bright, too performative, like a costume at the wrong funeral. My father recovered first, because that was what men like him did. They believed composure was a weapon. Harold, he said, attempting warmth, this is not the place for legal talk. Eleanor is unwell. We don't need to drag her into family business. Harold's expression didn't change. He set his briefcase down on the driveway with slow precision, clicked the latches open, and withdrew a thick manila folder. I'm here because Eleanor is unwell, Harold replied evenly. Not despite it. My mother took a step forward, her face rearranging itself into careful politeness, the version of herself she used in church and charity galas. Mr. Jennings, she said, voice soft, almost pleading, we understand you're doing your job, but this is Diane's birthday. We have guests. Surely this can wait. Harold glanced at her briefly, as one might glance at a decorative object that has started speaking out of turn. Diane, he said, you have had 10 years of waiting. My mother stiffened. Her smile faltered at the edges. Megan's eyes darted between them. What is happening? She demanded, her voice rising slightly. Dad, why is Grandma's lawyer here? My father shot her a look, sharp, silencing. Harold looked directly at Megan then. His gaze was calm, but it carried the weight of someone who has seen entitlement dressed in expensive clothing for decades. Miss Thompson, he said, Eleanor asked me to attend because she has recently learned that you were given a Mercedes purchased with the proceeds of her Steinway piano. Megan's cheeks flushed crimson. That's none of your business. Harold's tone did not change. It became my business when the asset was sold without the owner's consent. A soft murmur rippled through the guests. James Harrison's eyes narrowed, interest sharpening into scrutiny. Cynthia Harrison's posture straightened. Daniel looked suddenly uncomfortable, as if he'd realized he was standing on unstable ground. My father attempted to salvage the narrative. The piano was unused, he said smoothly. Eleanor is in hospice. We did what any reasonable family would do, converted a dormant asset into something practical. Harold's eyes flicked down to the folder, then back up. Did you obtain Eleanor's signature? Harold asked. My father held Harold's gaze. Eleanor gave verbal permission. Harold nodded slowly, as if absorbing the lie with clinical patience. And did you obtain a physician's assessment confirming Eleanor's mental incapacity? He asked. My father's jaw tightened. That isn't necessary. It is, Harold replied, when someone sells an asset belonging to a living, competent owner. My mother stepped forward again, her voice sharpening. You're implying we did something illegal. Harold looked at her for a long moment, then said, I'm not implying. I'm clarifying. Aunt Margaret let out a low sound, half satisfaction, half disgust. Finally, she muttered. My father's voice tightened into warning. Harold, you're embarrassing us. Harold closed the folder and held it like a judge holding a sentence. You embarrassed yourselves, he said. I'm simply documenting it. The crowd grew quieter. People stopped pretending to sip their champagne. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Harold turned slightly, addressing the guests with the same calm voice he used for my father. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, I appreciate that this is not the entertainment you expected today. But since the Harrison family is present, along with several of Mr. Thompson's business partners, it is important that the truth be stated clearly. James Harrison's expression hardened. Truth about what? Harold looked directly at him. About the integrity of the people you are doing business with, he replied. My father's face lost color. Harold, my father said quickly, this is not your concern. Harold's mouth curved slightly. It is precisely my concern. Then he reached back into the folder and withdrew a document inside a clear protective sleeve. He held it up so the sunlight caught the embossed seal. This, Harold said, is the recorded deed to this property. My mother's eyes widened. My father's voice became brittle. Put that away. Harold ignored him. The address, Harold continued, reading smoothly, belongs to Eleanor Whitmore. A few people gasped quietly. Someone whispered, what? My father laughed, once, sharp and unnatural. That's ridiculous. Eleanor transferred the house years ago. Harold's gaze slid to him. No, Richard. She didn't. The sentence was not dramatic. It was fatal. My mother's lips parted. That can't be right. Harold tilted the document slightly toward her. You're welcome to read it. My mother did not move. Megan looked at my father, panic flickering behind her eyes. Dad? My father's voice rose a fraction. This is a misunderstanding. Harold, you know we've lived here for 10 years. Yes, Harold replied, rent-free. That word, rent-free, hit the driveway like a stone thrown into glass. James Harrison's gaze shifted sharply toward my father. You don't own this house. My father's face hardened into rage. James, of course I do. Harold stepped forward one pace, still calm. No, he said. You don't. And then Harold delivered the sentence that ended everything. Eleanor never transferred ownership, he repeated. She allowed you to live here under the assumption that you were family and that you would behave accordingly. My mother's voice cracked. Why would she do that? Harold looked at her with quiet contempt. Because she wanted to see who you would become when you thought no one was watching, he said. And it appears she has seen enough. The driveway erupted into murmurs now. People whispered openly. Business partners looked at each other with raised eyebrows. The Harrisons stood stone still, their polite masks slipping away. Daniel Harrison looked at Megan as if seeing her for the first time. You told me your family owned this place, he said quietly. Megan's face went pale. We do. No, Harold said gently, cutting her off without effort. You don't. Aunt Margaret stepped forward, her voice loud enough for everyone. So all these years, she said, pointing at my parents, you've been living in Mom's house while acting like she was a burden? My father's eyes flashed. Margaret, shut up. Margaret smiled. Look at you, Richard. Still trying to command people like you're in court. My father turned to Harold, voice tight with fury. You can't just show up and threaten us on my wife's birthday. Harold's gaze stayed calm. I'm not threatening you, he said. I'm informing you. He opened the folder again and removed another paper. Eleanor has instructed me, Harold continued, to deliver immediate notice. You will vacate this property within 14 days. My mother let out a sound, small, broken. No, no, Harold, we can't. Harold's eyes didn't soften. You should have considered that before selling her piano. My father's composure finally cracked. This is absurd. He barked, and the shout echoed harshly in the cold air. You can't throw us out like criminals. Harold looked at him, almost pitying now. You sold the most meaningful object in Eleanor's life, he said quietly. The one item she promised to Annabelle. My father scoffed. It's a piano. Harold's voice sharpened for the first time. It was her legacy, he corrected. And you treated it like a pawn. Then Harold turned his gaze toward the guests again. To be clear, he said, Eleanor is mentally competent. Her physicians have documented it. She is aware of everything that has occurred. My mother's shoulders sagged. Megan's voice came out thin. She knows? Harold nodded. She knows. The words landed with finality. James Harrison took a step back from my father as if distance could cleanse association. I think we should go, Cynthia Harrison murmured to her husband, her voice tight with disgust. Daniel Harrison looked at Megan, his face a mixture of shock and quiet revulsion. Megan, he said slowly, you said this was your grandmother's gift. Megan's eyes filled with tears, not from remorse, but panic. Daniel, I didn't. He held up a hand. Don't. That single word was colder than any insult. My father's business partner, Charles, an older man with silver hair, cleared his throat. Richard, he said carefully, you told us Eleanor had transferred assets years ago. You presented this house as collateral in discussions. My father's face snapped toward him. It was a figure of speech. Charles's eyes narrowed. That is not how collateral works. The murmurs grew louder. People were no longer witnesses. They were judges. My mother looked around, her social world collapsing around her like a chandelier coming loose from its chain. Harold closed his folder, calm again. I will send formal paperwork tomorrow, he said. Until then, I suggest you stop presenting yourselves as owners of what you never legally possessed. Then Harold turned to me. Annabelle, he said softly, your grandmother asked me to give you this. He handed me a sealed envelope. My hands trembled slightly as I took it. My father's voice cracked into desperation. Anna, tell him to stop. Tell him this isn't necessary. I looked at him. And for the first time in my life, I felt absolutely nothing for his approval. This is necessary, I said quietly. You made it necessary. My mother's eyes widened. Annabelle, please. I didn't answer her. Aunt Margaret stepped closer to me, her presence a shield. Come on, she murmured. Let's go inside. You don't need to stand out here and watch them rot. Harold picked up his briefcase, nodding once toward the driveway as if the court session had ended. And slowly, one by one, guests began drifting away. Not because they were uncomfortable. Because my parents had become something no one wants to be seen beside. A liability. The Mercedes sat gleaming under the winter sun, the bow still absurdly bright. But now it looked less like a gift and more like evidence. And as I turned toward the front door, holding Grandma's envelope in my hands, I knew the final part of this story wouldn't require shouting. The most brutal punishments are the ones delivered with paperwork, witnesses, and silence. We went back inside, but the house no longer felt like theirs. That was the strangest part. The same hardwood floors, the same framed photographs, the same expensive candles burning on the console table, yet something essential had shifted. Ownership isn't only legal. It is psychological. It is the assumption that you have the right to take up space without fear. My parents had lost that assumption in the driveway. Now they moved differently. My mother's shoulders were rigid, her smile gone, her eyes scanning the room as if looking for exits. My father stood near the fireplace with a glass in his hand, but his grip was too tight, his knuckles whitening. Megan had disappeared upstairs, as if height could protect her from consequence. Guests murmured in clusters, their voices carefully lowered, but not careful enough. Everyone was talking. Everyone was recalculating. The Harrisons were still inside for a moment, standing near the entryway like people deciding whether they'd walked into the wrong universe. James Harrison's face was controlled, but his eyes were cold. Cynthia's mouth was set in a thin line of distaste. Daniel looked unsettled in a way that went beyond embarrassment. He looked betrayed. My father attempted one last act of salvage. He stepped toward James with a stiff smile, extending his hand as though nothing had happened. "James," he said, voice too loud, this was blown out of proportion. "Harold Jennings is old school. Eleanor is emotional. You know how families are." James didn't take his hand. He looked at my father for a long moment, as if studying an object that had just revealed a crack running through its core. "You used your dying mother-in-law's property to buy your daughter a car," James said finally, his voice calm but heavy with judgment. "Then you lied about it in front of my family." My father's smile twitched. "It wasn't. It was exactly that," James interrupted. "And if you can do that to your own family, I have to assume you can do it in business." My father's face turned pale. "That's unfair," my mother whispered, stepping forward, her voice strained. "We've been under stress. Eleanor is ill." Cynthia Harrison turned slightly toward her, expression composed but merciless. "I don't care," she said softly. "Illness does not excuse dishonor." The word dishonor landed like a gavel. Daniel looked at Megan's empty spot on the staircase, then back at my parents. "I should go," he said. My mother's voice broke. "Daniel, please." But Daniel had already turned away, following his parents toward the door. Megan reappeared then, rushing down the stairs with panic in her eyes. "Daniel," she called, her voice too high. "Daniel, wait." He stopped at the doorway. Turned back. For a moment, I thought he might soften. That he might accept her explanation the way people do when they're invested in a fantasy. But his eyes were different now. "You told me your grandmother gave you that car," he said quietly. Megan's throat bobbed as she swallowed. She wanted me to have it." Daniel's jaw tightened. "You're lying again." Her face crumpled. "I didn't ask them to sell it." "No," he said. "But you smiled with the keys in your hand." That sentence was not loud. It didn't need to be. It was a surgical removal of trust. Megan reached for him. "Daniel." He stepped back. "Don't touch me." Then he left. The Harrisons left with him, and the front door closed behind them with a heavy finality. For a few seconds, silence filled the house so completely that I could hear the faint hiss of a candle wick. My mother turned toward my father as if the rage she'd been containing had finally found its target. "You promised me this would secure everything," she hissed. My father's eyes flashed. "Don't start blaming me. You sold her piano." My mother snapped. "You put us in this position." "I did what we needed to do," my father barked, voice rising now. "Megan needed that car." Megan let out a sob. "I didn't need it. I needed him." My father rounded on her. "This isn't about him. This is about—" "What?" Aunt Margaret cut in sharply from beside me. "Status? Optics? Your precious image?" My father's gaze snapped to her. "Stay out of this." Margaret laughed, cold and humorless. "I've stayed out of it for 10 years. Look where that got her. She pointed at me, not accusingly, but as evidence. My mother looked at me then, eyes red. Annabelle, she said, voice trembling, tell Harold to stop this, please. We can fix it. I studied my mother's face and realized something quietly devastating. She was not asking because she regretted hurting me. She was asking because she had been exposed. I can't fix what you chose, I said softly. My father stepped toward me, anger shifting into something like desperation. You're enjoying this, he said. I blinked at him. No. That was the truth. Enjoyment would have implied frivolity. This was not frivolous. It was necessary. I'm not enjoying it, I repeated. I'm surviving it. My father's voice sharpened. That piano was an object. It was her life, I said. And it was mine, I added, calm, firm. My father opened his mouth to argue. But Harold's voice cut through the room from near the dining table, where he had set his folder down. Richard, Harold said, I'd like to remind you, Eleanor asked me to ensure Annabelle receives the remaining items she designated for her, immediately. My father froze. Remaining items? Harold nodded once, then looked at me. Annabelle, he said gently, Eleanor wanted you to open the envelope now. My fingers tightened around the sealed envelope in my hand. I had almost forgotten it in the chaos, but now it felt heavier than paper should. The room had gone silent again. I broke the seal carefully, as if opening something sacred. Inside was a single page, written in my grandmother's elegant, deliberate handwriting. I recognized the way her letters curved, strong, unsentimental. I began to read. My dearest Anna, if you are reading this, then your mother and Richard finally showed you exactly who they are. I am sorry you had to see it so clearly. But clarity is a gift, even when it arrives like grief. The Steinway was promised to you because you loved it for what it was, not for what it could buy. That kind of love is rare. It deserved to be rewarded. They sold it because they do not understand the meaning of anything they cannot monetize. I did not transfer the deed to this house because I did not trust them with ownership. I watched them live here for 10 years and confuse entitlement with rights. Now they will learn the difference. You, however, will not spend your life begging to be treated with dignity. Harold will help you reclaim what is yours. Not just property. Your peace. When the time comes, do not forgive them out of guilt. Forgiveness is not a duty. It is a choice. And you have already chosen yourself. With all the love I have left. Grandma Eleanor. When I finished reading, my vision blurred for a moment. Not from sadness. From something more complex. A mixture of grief and honor. My mother's face collapsed. Tears spilled over, not elegant now, not controlled. My father stood rigid, breathing hard, as if the letter had struck him physically. Aunt Margaret wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, anger still present but softened by something like reverence. Megan sank onto the staircase, sobbing openly. This isn't fair, she whispered. I turned toward her. It wasn't fair when you held the keys, I replied calmly. She looked up at me, face streaked. I didn't think it would go this far. Neither did I said. That's the difference. Harold stepped forward. Annabelle, he said quietly, Eleanor also instructed me to establish a protected account in your name from the remaining estate assets. You'll have access immediately, and... He glanced toward my parents. Richard and Diane will have none. My mother let out a strangled sound. No, Harold, please. Harold's voice remained neutral. You forfeited access when you sold what was not yours. My father's voice rose again, trembling with rage. We are her family. Harold looked at him coldly. No, he said. You are her dependents. The words stripped them bare. Around the room, guests who had stayed to witness the fallout began to drift toward the exit. Not out of discomfort, but because the story was finished. My parents' reputation had imploded. Their standing in front of the Harrisons was gone. Their business credibility had been cracked. Their home was no longer theirs. Megan's engagement was likely over before it had properly begun. And I? I felt strangely calm. Not triumphant. Finished. I turned toward my mother and father. I'm going back to hospice now, I said. My mother's voice broke. Anna, please. My father's voice was rough. You're doing this to punish us. No, I said quietly. You did this to yourselves. Aunt Margaret touched my elbow. I'll drive you. Harold nodded respectfully. I'll be in contact tomorrow with the paperwork. I walked to the front door, pausing for a brief moment to look at the house my parents had displayed like proof of their success. It was beautiful. And it had never been theirs. I stepped outside into the winter air and felt it fill my lungs, clean and cold. The sky was still bright. The world unchanged. But I was not unchanged. Because the truth had finally become public. And once a family's illusion collapses, it never rebuilds the same way. That night, I sat beside my grandmother in hospice, holding her hand. You did it, I whispered. Her eyes opened slightly, the faintest hint of satisfaction passing through them. I told you, she whispered back, voice barely there, restraint is power. I smiled through tears that felt like release. For the first time in my life, I wasn't pleading to be chosen. I had been chosen by the only person who mattered. And I would never again allow people who called me weak to decide what I deserved. That was the moment I took everything back. Not the piano. Not the house. Myself. Sometimes the greatest betrayal doesn't come from strangers. It comes from the people who assume you will stay silent because you always have. But silence is not loyalty. Silence is what people demand when they are afraid of the truth. If you've ever been treated like the easy one in your family, the one who sacrifices, the one who forgives, the one who carries the weight, please hear me. You are not weak. You are simply someone who has been trained to survive quietly. And when you finally stop surviving and start choosing yourself, it won't look loud. It will look like boundaries, paperwork, witnesses, and peace. If this story resonated with you, stay with me. Because there are more stories like this, where dignity is reclaimed, and the ones who underestimated you finally learn the cost.